on, ladies and gentlemen? It's the one and only James Williams, also known as Dog Waters to the entire paranormal world. And I'm back with another phenomenal guest, and somebody I'm really excited about talking to, Basecamp Chris. I'm going to tell y'all why I'm excited about talking to this guy, because he's a storyteller just like me. Like I was telling him in the previous pre-interview, the difference is he's got the kahunas to go out in the woods and then camp overnight and then tell you scary stories while he records it all alone in the dark. Without any more further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Basecamp Chris. How are you doing today, sir? And thank you for joining me.
I am doing good. I appreciate being on your show here, and that's a nice introduction for me. I appreciate it.
No, man, I appreciate you being here. I'm gonna talk a little bit slower so to give the internet time to catch up, so we won't have any problems. But when I ran across you, I was looking for people in the paranormal field that were telling stories, because I love the concept of, storytelling. It's the oldest art form on the planet. Like literally, it's storytelling is how things were passed down from generation to generation. And when you find people who are good at telling stories like you find a kindred soul and a kindred spirit that you can work with, because there's a certain appreciation for it. How did you get into the whole thing of telling stories? Was it something you did?
I started out my YouTube channel wanting to do an outdoor channel, and it started off a little general, but I found I would be in a location, and I love history, and so I would say, I'm camping here and I'm near, like, for instance, Carson Pass, and so I'd go, so this is a very historic pass. In fact, Kit Carson and John Fremont, the explorer, came through here in like 1843, and I would just, it just made sense to have something like that to talk about, because I'm in this location and something happened here, a couple hundred years ago. And so I just would interject these little stories as I was doing my camping and then reviewing gear and things like that. But that's kind of that's where it started.
All right, so as a kid, you weren't into scary stories or telling stories, nothing like that. It didn't go any further. It's just you kind of stumbled upon it.
I liked old movies and Twilight Zone and things like that, because they are essentially stories. People have to write that stuff and then they act them out. So that's kind of what I grew up with. And then I grew up doing a lot of camping and outdoors activities up in Minnesota, where I'm from originally. And so it just kind of evolved into history. And then I really like the idea of getting into essentially campfire stories. For the most part, I don't dig a fire pit and put rocks around it and put fire in it. It tends to, the problem with doing that is, how the smoke follows you when you're in camp and stuff, and you're telling a story and all of a sudden you start coughing or something.
Right.
Because you got smoke in your face. So usually have a lantern. I got a lantern right behind me here. But so I thought I'd go out in the woods and just have some really interesting lighting and then just tell stories in the woods like that. It was just seemed to make sense to me, and I'm pretty comfortable out in the forest. I'm definitely more comfortable when I'm there before the sun sets, and then the sun sets, and I feel more familiar, as opposed to, you're driving down the highway and then you step out and go into the woods. It's a little spookier. So, yeah.
No, man, I admire any man who gets up and goes out into the woods in the dark at all. Anybody who can spend the night in the woods, I admire them. I remember when I was a kid, Chris, my dad made me join the Boy Scouts, right? And so they were like, we got this camping trip.
Yeah.
And I went to this school called St. Leo the Great. And so they had the Boy Scout camp trip. We go out to the woods. We got to set up the tents. And so the scout leader was like, okay, we're going to tell spooky stories around the fire.
Exactly.
And I'm like, nah, I think I'm going to go in my tent. I don't want to hear no spooky stories. He's like, nah, if you go in your tent, something might get you. You want to be with everybody by the fire. Man, I sit there by that fire with him, and he tells some of the creepiest stories about floating heads and mermaids coming out of the lake. And I'm like, dude, this is not what camping is supposed to be about. So I kind of get mad. And I always was a smart-mouthed kid. So I'm like, look, you're scaring everybody. He was like, listen, you got to learn what camping's about. It's about hanging out and having fun. Nobody slept that night because he scared the hell out of all the children.
Yeah.
He was the only one that slept. let's go into some of your stories. What's been some of the most interesting things that you had come across your desk and things that you talked about? Like the things that you find interesting, not necessarily things that are most popular. Because I find that the things that I find most
Yeah,
interesting aren't the most popular things.
yeah, exactly. Again, a lot of stuff for me comes down to history, and I like history, and a lot of these things that we're talking about have a history. Like Bigfoot, the Native Americans have their stories that for hundreds of years they've have stories of encounter, relationship, what's some kind of a connection or at least knowledge of Sasquatch, Wendigo, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. And so I find that really interesting, as well as I'm in a very historic part of the country. I'm in northern Nevada here in Carson City. And this is where the wagon trains in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s came through. They came through right through the state of Nevada here, and then get over, the Sierra Nevada mountains, right? And a lot of these passes have a lot of history. Donner Pass, the Donner Party, obviously, and the early settlers here, and the history. And then a lot of that history, if you dig deeper, there's ghosts and hauntings and stories of attached to these old buildings, structures, towns. Nevada's probably got more ghost towns than any state in the entire country. So there's a lot of history here / paranormal, and then you throw in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and there's a lot of Sasquatch, Bigfoot activity and stories of encounters up there. And I've had my own stories, and so I find that really ghosts, Bigfoot is really very interesting to me with the history
If
attached
I'm
to it.
not
So
mistaken, Ghost Adventures did something. I want to say in Carson City. I want to say they did. It was a ghost town
yep.
outside of Carson City, because I remember
Virginia
that
City.
that's where it was.
Yep, it's got to be because that is considered the most haunted town in America, Virginia City, and it's like 16 miles from here.
Dude,
Yeah.
I met Nick from Ghost Adventures a couple of times, and Nick Groff, and we hung out a couple of times at different little comic cons, and I
Uh
actually
huh.
did like a little ghost hunt with him down here,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
they have it. He has it
Oh,
down to a
wow.
science, bro. Like he really does. He was telling me, "Hey, this is how you maintain your cool." Because I'm sitting there at this voodoo house that Bloody Mary has, right? And we're upstairs in this
Uh
like
huh.
doing an investigation, and bro,
Excuse me.
something comes over me, and I start to sing, and I just start singing. And he
Wow.
was like, "Well, why are you singing?" I was like, "Man, I don't know why I want to sing this song." It was called "Nobody Gets Out Alive" by. It was a song that Samuel Jackson sung on the movies he was in. So I started singing, and so then I switched seats. He and I switched
Yeah.
spots, and he was like, "James, I got the urge to sing," and I was like, "Well, something's telling me to stab you in the neck right now." And he was like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, something's telling me
Wow.
to stab you in the neck. I'm about to go downstairs." He was like, "Do you have a blade?" I said, "I keep a blade on me all the time. Something's telling me to stab you in the neck. I'm about to go." So I go downstairs, and when it's all over, he comes down, and we look at the video, Chris. And on the video,
Yeah.
you see while I'm sitting in that chair, you see an
Hmm.
orb come from a guitar that's on the ground, and it goes up, and then the orb goes into my shoulder. And then when I
Wow.
move, you see the orb go back into the guitar. And when I go over to the other side, you see the orb go into him, like literally smashes into him. Then he says he wants to sing, and I don't know what happened with the whole knife thing,
But
but it was crazy to
yeah.
the point.
Wow. Wow. That's really crazy. Yeah, I'm fascinated by those stories of the ghost stories, and particularly history. There's a couple of mansions right in this area here, and there's pretty elaborate history with them. And then there's also a history of hauntings and sightings of ghosts and different encounters like that. And it's really interesting. There's one called the Bowers Mansion, and it's actually a county. I think it's a county has control over it, and so it's like a county park. And they open it up for tours from Memorial Day through like Labor Day or something.
Uh
But
huh.
that has this history of these people that struck it really big in the Comstock lode, which was up in Virginia City, the silver lode of the mining, and they had certificates, and then they became rich really literally overnight. They were the early millionaires of the Comstock lode, and there's a history of these people and how they got all these riches, built this mansion, and then essentially tragedy struck where they had illness, the dad died, the daughter died, and then the mom that was left, she was trying to keep the mansion going, and she eventually she passed away, and then this huge mansion. It was one of the largest mansions from St. Louis, between St. Louis and San Francisco at one time in the 1870s or something. And anyways, there was a story about after it was opened up, people doing tours of it, and it was decades, and then some ladies in the 1940s pulled some money together and people and support, and they made it part of the community as far as historical preservation kind of thing. But anyways, there was a story where there was this tour going through, like in the 1950s or something, maybe 60s, and the people at the end of the tour noticed this young girl come out of one of the rooms, and this little young girl said, "I used to live here," and she was dressed in period costume from that time, from the 1870s, 1880s. And they thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. Okay. And she said, oh, yeah, I used to play. We had, different toys and the horse or whatever that she would play with. And she kind of explained what she did. And they thought, okay. And then the tour kept going, moving through the house. And they saw in one of the main rooms, you know how they used to do portraits of people when they had a lot of money in the, 18
Yeah, like the
days.
family portrait. Yeah.
Yeah, they would do these giant portraits. And they saw this little, I think she was a 13-year-old girl. Her portrait was on the wall, and then they just saw her moments ago, and they saw her portrait in like the next room in one of the main rooms, the living room or something. And I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, there's many stories like that where people see things in these old mansions and historical buildings, like in Virginia City and all around this region. There's many places like that. So
No, I mean, so that means you got a wealth of content to talk about, especially since you love history. And so basically, you dig into the history of paranormal events and places and
yeah,
locations. That's a great niche, man. I mean, it's a phenomenal niche. And there's so much data and so much information
yeah,
out there that you can dig into, man. I just like to encourage people that are in the genre of storytelling just to perfect what it is that you love to do. So if you love to talk about history and stories from a historic perspective, man, talk about them all day long. But just be the top one at telling them. You know what I'm saying? Be the
I
best
like
at
that.
telling them. Any of the
Yeah.
locations, the wooded locations you go to, have any of those places been like haunted where you experienced something while you were there, or had you had any weird encounters while you were out in the woods?
I haven't had encounters with like Virginia City and things. I've done tours at Virginia City of the Washoe House. Is that what it's
Uh huh.
called? It's a bar up there now, and I did a tour up there, and I didn't have anything happen. But they said when you go into the basement of the Washoe, I can't remember the last name of the Washoe House or whatever it is. They used to store bodies of people in the basement of the Washoe House up in Virginia City because in the middle of winter, the ground is too frozen to bury people. So they would store them until the spring. And then many people have gone into this basement on these tours, and they've seen things and they've felt somebody tapping their shoulder. And they've had different experiences like that. But I've personally never had anything like that, but it doesn't mean I don't believe it's possible and all like that, because I know people, there's way too many stories, as you know as well, right? There's way too many stories of these things to say everyone's hoaxing, everyone's up to up to pranking us on this stuff. I think it takes more work to do pranking and hoaxing than it does to just say, I don't know, this is what happened to me. But I did have an encounter I'll just call it a Sasquatch encounter. I don't know for sure, but all the signs pointed to possibly something like that. And it actually happened over 3 different occurrences. In 2016, I just moved to Reno, and I love the outdoors, so I went up into the Sierra Nevada mountains, and I went to the Gold Lakes Basin is what it's called. It's this high basin with lakes in it, and it's surrounded by mountains, and I love camping and stuff. So I went up there, and it was late October, and there was no one else up there because it had been raining all week. And when you're a camper and it's raining all week, you kind of assume it's good. And then the forecast was for more rain, so people just weren't coming up. And so I went to this particular lake called Goose Lake, pulled in the parking lot, and there was no one there. I didn't see any cars. And normally in a weekend, there's some people camping. But this was like October 20th, 21st, maybe 2016. And I decided to hike around the lake, and there's no trail around this lake up in the Sierras here. And I put my rain jacket on, I went around the lake, and when I was just about on the back side of the lake, coming around the other side, I saw these footprints. And the footprints, interesting, were tiny. They were maybe 6 inches long, and they were in the mud and in pretty precarious places, meaning that there's sharp rocks and sticks, pine cones, because the lake had receded later in the year. I also noticed other footprints where I saw the whole track of them, and they were like in a line, like straight line, not like people tend to walk left foot, right foot. It's kind of a spread out a little bit with some spacing. But these were like on almost like a tightrope, like somebody's walking on a tightrope. Even more exaggerated, where they swung over, the right foot swings over to the left, and then the left foot swings over to the other side. And I took pictures of all of this, and really tiny footprints in the mud. And then on one side of the lake, there was all these downed trees. The trees died and they fall in the lake, and the current carries them over to the edge of the lake, and it's really challenging to get through there. And so my point is that who would bring their 3, 4, maybe 5-year-old child late October when it's cold and wet and say, yeah, why don't you walk around in the mud here? Wouldn't that be fun?
Right, walk around barefooted in the freezing
mud.
Walk
around barefoot. And the Sierra Nevada are composed of a lot of granite. So underneath some of this mud, there's like sharp rocks protruding like straight up. And it's like, dude, you do not want to take your boots off and go walking around in this, because it looks like mud for part of it, and then you sink, and there's sticks, rocks, pine cones underneath. There's debris under there, and you can wreck your feet, And so I thought, okay, that's really interesting. So I took a lot of pictures. I really hung out. And then the next summer, I was up in Lassen National Park, and this is what I'm saying. There's like some different occurrences. And I was with some friends. We had camped, and I was out in this large meadow, and there's a stream flowing through at the middle of it. The highway's over here, and I hiked out quite a ways, and there was this stream, and in the stream was these brook trout, right? And brook trout tend to kind of stay together, and so I'd peek up over the creek, and I would see these trout, and they would like take off, and because they could see me clearly, and so I kind of followed them out in this meadow way out there a ways. And then I looked down while I was kneeling, kind of spying on the trout and playing with the fish, so to speak. And I found this time a large footprint, human-like footprint, but pretty large. Large meaning wide too, not just long or something. But it seemed like a size 14 or so, and it was really large. And it was in the mud, but the mud had dried. And then I found another one, and I kind of followed them till I lost them. So then I got the tripod out, and I took some pictures. And I went, that's interesting. And then the next year, I went out back to this Goose Lake, where I saw the smaller footprints, right? And I was camping on that lake, and it's a walk-in campground. So you got to carry your stuff from the parking lot, and you hike down the trail a little ways. and then you have these little camp spots. So you can't drive to the campsite, the actual campsite. And so it's kind of in between regular camping and backpacking. It's kind of a quasi. So there was no one else there except on the other side of the lake. There was a few campers. That night, I was about 10:30 at night. I'd finished dinner. Had my tent set up, camping by myself in the woods, about 50 feet back from the lake, not yards. And I heard this high-pitched, I don't know what I want to call it, howl, I guess. And can you still hear me? And you know what a bell curve is? It goes up,
Right.
and it comes down. And so I'm a graphic designer, so I kind of think, how can I remember this? It's like, wow. And I heard this high-pitched, woo.
Yeah.
On the
We
other
know
side
what
of the
that
lake.
was.
And I'm like, wow, what is that? At first I thought, yeah. At first I thought, is that some kind of a crane or something? Some kind of a bird or, some kind of a, and it really got my attention, right? And so I got the headlight out. I'm standing there. It's 10:39. I think I still had the campfire going. It was definitely on the other side of the lake. And then I heard it again. Same thing. Ooh, real high, and then came down. It's like, okay, let's remember that. And then off to the left, south of me, and this Gold Lakes Basin is what it's called, Goose Lake specifically, and it's all wilderness around there. And I heard the coyotes, and I knew they were coyotes because they were yipping, and they were way in the other direction, responding or reacting. I'm not sure what they were doing, but they heard it too. And so it wasn't just me. And this thing did this 2 or 3 times more. It's like 4, maybe 5 times. I can't remember exactly. And then it just kind of stopped. And I went, okay, wow, that's interesting. All right. And I was kind of on edge, but kind of excited at the same time. I had just a few years earlier, I had been looking at a book called Bigfoot, The True Story of Apes in America.
Yeah, I've heard of that book.
And it's kind of a history of Bigfoot, essentially. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's really, wow. And I came from Montana. I never had any experience there. And I went, I think this is the same kind of stuff. This is, I thought the footprints, and now I'm hearing this thing. Wow. And I was like, I felt like, wow, I'm kind of actualizing something or, experiencing it, And so I go to bed that night after that, 20 minutes later, okay, no more sounds, I guess. And I go to bed. And then about an hour later, behind my tent, camping next to this lake, I hear footsteps, but pounding, like boom, 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 boom. But I heard 2 of them. And then I heard this, I don't know if we want to call it a growl or a grunt or something, but it was like, ooh, 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 something like that, right?
Wow.
And
you in the tent, I would be losing it, bro. I would be losing.
Tent, and this damn thing is behind me, yeah. And I'm like, well, damn, I ain't gonna sit here and I got to know what's going on. So I unzip the tent, pull out the headlight, and I don't get out of the tent because tents are kind of like, they're angled, right? Like this, like got somewhat of an angle on it. So you can unzip it and you can still be standing in the tent and be partially out of the tent, looking out. And so I turn around, I'm shining the light across these trees behind me, seeing, okay, whatever it is somewhere right back here. I didn't see anything, but I saw 2 trees, and it was kind of a clearing right in the middle because the rest was pretty thick brush. And I went, that's about where I heard this thing, was right in this, it had to be right there, and that would be like space for this thing to stand there or something, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden I felt kind of vulnerable from behind because I'm so focused on one direction, right? You get so focused one way, and you're like, wait a minute, what's going on behind me? So I turn around behind me, I'm looking, okay, there's nothing there. And I go back in the tent and zip it up, and I didn't hear anything else the rest of the night, but I had kind of these visuals of, what would it be like if I shined the light and I saw a 7-8 foot tall hairy man standing there staring right at me, because I have this kind of an acceptance that, yeah, I think it's a very real possibility, And so if I was to see something, I don't know if I would be shocked. I sure would be probably afraid, but I wouldn't be like, totally shocked because I think there's definitely something to it. So
Yeah,
anyways,
I'll tell you what.
that's the encounter I had.
You find yourself in a situation like that where you had to hike in. See, I can see if your car was close by, Chris. I can see you being okay. But you literally have to hike into the location and
Yes.
then set up camp. That's kind of terrifying, bro. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I don't know how you did it. I'd have been spooked out my mind, man. Cause
And
you feel
it was
safe when you can get to your car, but you gotta run away. Come on, man. I would be spooked, man.
yeah, I was like, okay, I could feel the hair in the back of my neck. I could feel, you know, some anxiety and some stress and yet at the same time, I kind of got to know what the hell's going on out there because I'm not the kind of person that's going to just crawl in the bottom of my sleeping bag and ride it out. I'm like, okay, well, at least I got to see. If something came up to my tent, started shaking the tent and making some sounds, I'd be, okay, well, I'm going to crawl in the bag here and just pray or something.
But you have that inquisitive mind, so I mean, hey man, I don't think I could do it. I'm just speaking for me. Like I don't even think I could put myself in that situation. I put myself in a situation like that before, and it didn't turn out too good.
Wow, yeah, yeah, that sounds really interesting. But yeah, there's something about when it gets dark and just it's like, oh, okay, well, we kind of gotta get through this. But I've since got really good lighting, really powerful lights, and that gives me more comfort to know I can just turn that thing on and I can illuminate the forest. So whatever's out there, at least I'm going to know what's going on, and that is really for me. It's very helpful just to have that ability as opposed to some cheap Walmart flashlight that you're struggling with, and you're like in the movies where they're hitting them. Like, come on, I'm hearing something out there, and it's the flashlights malfunction on you. So
No, and could
yeah,
you imagine how it was for humans before they had like flashlights and really
yeah,
lanterns, and they had to deal with because these things have been around forever, and you had to deal with
yeah,
that same fear, man. That would be horrific. I mean, it would really be horrific for like old settlers that went
exactly.
out there and tried to set up towns and mining
Yeah,
camps. Man, that would be absolutely horrific to hear that at night, and you don't have
yeah,
any light
exactly.
whatsoever. I mean, it would be
And they
horrific.
didn't have vehicles they could hop into and take off at 65 miles an hour or whatever. They're kind of stuck. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
then they didn't have the
but
modern day weapons. They didn't have anything.
but one of my theories on Sasquatch is that if you know wildlife like mountain lions, for instance, they're not going to warn you. They're not going to tip you off. They're not going to make sounds. They're just going to jump out of a tree, jump out of the brush, and they're going to attack, kill, and do their job. That's it, right? They're all about stealth, quiet, kill, boom.
Right.
And most of the stories I've heard about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and I've heard quite a few, and I know you have a lot of experience hearing stories and telling, but they tend to throw rocks. They tend to make a lot of racket in the brush. They tend to growl, uh, bluff charge, even push trees over, do things to, it sounds like to me, intimidate people and to get them to move out of the area. Not necessarily we're a predator and you're the prey. And if it was a predator prey situation, they would win pretty much every time. And I don't care about your guns and everything else you got. They are fast, they're powerful, they're nocturnal. They could, if they wanted to, they could take you out like nothing, right? And so my theory is they're not necessarily trying to harm and hurt you, but they definitely, in a lot of cases, are trying to intimidate people to get them to get out of their territory. They sound very territorial to me. Anyways, that's my theory philosophy on that, from what
No,
I
and
know.
I
So
think you're right on the money when it comes to them being territorial and them giving you an opportunity to leave. There's this theory of what you're talking about is a theory of them
yes,
herding a person out of the area. So they do things to herd you away. It may be two or three of
yeah,
them, and they want to slowly push you out of the area. Now, if you're hard headed and you decide to stay or you do anything crazy, that's when you get into the real negative activity from Bigfoots. That's when they start like
Yeah.
really hurting people. But you're right, they do hurt people out of the area, and I believe that when we start talking about these beings in particular, they have a humanistic nature to them, to where they have various personalities. So you may run into a Bigfoot that's a
Yeah.
loner, that's crazy, that's been having interactions with humans,
Yeah.
that's been negative, and then that Bigfoot may decide, hey, I don't want humans around here. I'm going to eat you, and I'm going to take you, and I'm going to
Wow.
eat you. So it's just people have to be mindful. And there's no, I know there's like field manuals in the military on how to deal with Bigfoot. I talked to a guy, D.A. Roberts, and we're going to try and get some of the special operations field manuals on how to deal with them. But
Yeah.
it's
Wow.
clear that they're real and they can be a threat, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's no real clear protocol. If you just do this, they will respond like this and everything's a-okay, right? There's no perfect protocol. But the best thing is, it's kind of like a grizzly bear. If you encounter a grizzly bear on the trail, the best thing is to get off the trail. Don't make direct eye contact. Slowly back away. Let them know that they are the king of the mountain, the forest, whatever you want to call it. And it's a non-confrontational approach is your best bet before something happens. There's kind of this, whatever you do when you encounter something, what you do can have it go one way or the other. So it's best with a grizzly bear or Sasquatch is to kind of back down, show some respect, show some yielding or whatever you want to call it, and let them know that you acknowledge them in their territory. So yeah.
Nope, I 100% agree with you. And I think the guys, and I know it's breaking up on you, and so I'm gonna tell you this, but you might be able to pick up bits and pieces of it. But
Okay.
one of the things that we learned on from our camera project when we had the cameras and we were capturing evidence of Bigfoot and we were catching the activity was that they were so curious, inquisitive that they would come in and watch. But in order to stay off camera, they would literally lay on their belly and belly crawl in.
Yeah.
So they would belly crawl all the way up to the camera as
Wow.
close as they could. And I think we would have like 200, 300 people watching the cameras. And people would spot it. And they'd be like, there it is right there in the bushes. I'm looking at it.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it got to the point to where, because these particular cameras were on someone's property behind their house. And it got to the point to where it was so much activity that I started worrying about the homeowner, because I'm talking about in the middle of
Sure.
the night you would hear him growling and screaming. In the daytime you would hear him growling, like you would literally hear a growl in the middle of the day, like 12 noon.
Wow.
At night you would hear him off in the distance, and it would sound like they were mimicking dogs barking, but it was just too loud of a bark. It was,
Yeah.
I mean, it was too deep. A regular dog's bark, and then it was like a mimic, but it was just deep and long, and so
Hmm.
it's terrifying. That's why I say I admire anyone who can go out into the woods and who can know that there's Sasquatch around and then stay there. So I really admire anyone who can do that.
Well,
And
thank
then
you. Yeah.
people who go
Yeah.
camping on a regular basis are like they're like on God level outdoorsmen to
Yeah. I
me.
grew up camping. I'm very comfortable out in nature. Yeah. Sometimes I'm more comfortable in the outdoors than even like a Walmart or something. I get like, it's too many people. There's too much going on. That's just too much crazy parking lots. I'd rather be out in the woods somewhere. And
So you rather be out in the
yeah.
woods where life is simple, huh? No, I hear
Simple.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I could
So,
agree with you on
but
that. I love
yeah.
to fish.
But
I'd rather be fishing than deal with people
oh,
any day of the week.
yeah, yeah. So I always it's kind of my go-to, my break to go out and I don't have to go out miles and miles to be, I can just go off. And sometimes I do my stories are a little ways out there, a mile or so, and sometimes they're, not too far, maybe 50, 100 yards or something in the forest. And my girlfriend lives up in the Plumas National Forest, and so I got acres and acres of land right there to work with, and I can just hike off and find a nice location and stuff. But yeah, it's really a lot of lot of interesting facets to the whole Sasquatch thing. I'm really pretty fascinated by it, and there's just a lot to know and as far as all these people's encounters that they've had, there's just a lot of different a lot of different stories, and I find it interesting that these stories, what makes it seem so believable, they'll have this whole story, and then they'll say, yeah, and I saw this thing for 3, maybe 4 seconds. It's like, if you're going to be lying about this, you're not going to say you saw it for 3 or 4 seconds. You're going to have a more elaborate story, if you're going to. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and those sightings tend to be that short. Once you when you and I'm gonna make sure people, if you listen to this interview, I'm at the end. I'm gonna have Chris give his email address so you guys can start sending Chris some of your encounters, some of the things that you saw, so he can have some content to talk about
yeah,
while he's out by the woods and in the fireplace, and you'll be able to hear your encounter there. But Chris, one of the things you'll come to understand is, so there's sightings and then there's encounters, right? So some people classify like a Bigfoot
yeah,
encounter, and it's really a sighting. Like, I'm walking out in the woods and I saw something peek at me from behind a tree. That's a sighting. An
yeah,
encounter is you and
yes.
your girlfriend are hanging out in the car and y'all got the windows rolled down and something reaching and pull her by her hair. That's an encounter.
Wow.
And so there's things like
Yes,
that happen. So there's opportunities for both. And what I say is, they all matter in the equation. What is Bigfoot itself? Because the more sightings and encounters we can capture, record, listen to, the more data we can gather about these creatures and the better understanding we have of them. And as we come to that understanding,
absolutely.
it's safer for people. Because if you know, hey, for example, I know for a fact that you can talk to a Sasquatch and talk it down, and it will understand what you're saying. I know for a fact, I've seen it on camera, on my own cameras, where they got aggressive and somebody said, hey, y'all gonna need to stop, y'all gonna need to slow down, you're gonna need to calm down. And then all of a sudden they started backing off and they started calming down. So we witnessed
Yeah.
that live. So most people don't even know this.
Wow.
They don't even realize that these creatures have been in the woods for thousands of years, shadowing humans, listening to humans,
Yep.
watching humans, and they won't make that
Paralleling.
leap to understand that no, they can understand our language. We don't know what the hell they saying, but they definitely know what the hell we saying. So it's one of those things
Wow.
to where if we can just get that message out to people who are in the woods, it would help them a lot. If they know, hey, if you experience something weird, put your hands up in the air like in a disarming manner, like, hey, I'm leaving, I'm sorry, I'm going about my business, because they've been seeing these gestures forever, and they've been hearing that tone and those words
Yeah.
forever. So it's just important that we
Yeah.
communicate things to people.
I heard yesterday, and it just came up somewhere in the news, and then there was somebody had a small news thing, and it was about this person in Georgia, and they put out a game camera, and then they recorded it, and they've been looking for wildlife for a while, and then this one day afternoon, they got these various sounds that they picked up, and they were howls and growls and different Sasquatch sounds. It was on TikTok, and it's fairly new. I don't know if anybody else has heard it right away, but or heard it. But when I went, and some people made comments like, "Oh, it's a bunch of drunk people in the woods." And I listened to it, and I went, "Oh no, is this is pretty interesting. This has got some validity to it. Had a good howl in there, and even had some bird sounds. Those kind of like,
Right.
those,
Those mimicking
right,
sounds. Yep.
the mimicking sounds. And I know birds pretty well, and I was like, that's one of those mimicking. Oh my gosh! And then there was maybe some tree knocks or something. But everything registered pretty cleanly for me. It was like, this is very potentially a Sasquatch. It was Georgia, TikTok, recent upload by somebody, I don't know who uploaded, and it was some fairly long video, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. You can hear birds, you can actually hear bees and bugs flying by the camera, wind blowing, and then all of a sudden you hear in the background and various things like that. I was like, wow, this is not to be dismissed too quickly. So
No, I think
I'm
it's a
gonna
great
check
mistake that
look
people
up look at
make
that
when
one
they.
again or listen to that one again. So
No, I think people make a huge mistake when they dismiss it. All right, Chris, we're coming up on a time period. Let's
yeah,
try and get your information out there, guys. Before we started this interview, Chris and I were talking about getting you guys in contact with him with some of your encounters. I know a lot of you guys have Bigfoot encounters, and I focus a lot on Dogman. So if you have something that happened, like Mark Birch, I know you listen. Mark, Chris will be a good guy for your encounters that you've had. So if you guys have had Bigfoot encounters or any other paranormal encounters that you want to share, I want you to go ahead
Huh.
and share them with Chris because, again, like I told you, our job is to help promote and move people along and help people get more promotion and make the community, bring unity to the community. So, as the
Yeah.
Dark Waters family, that's what we're here to do. Chris, tell everybody where they can find you and how they can contact you.
Sure. Number one, I am on YouTube. My channel is called Basecamp Chris. Just Google, type that in right in the Google or the YouTube search. And then I call my channel Stories from the Woods, essentially, but it's Basecamp Chris, like my name. And then I can be reached at email, basecampchris2@gmail.com, basecampchris2@gmail.com. And that's all one word. And yeah, I'll check read your stories and do what I can with them. And yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great to hear from you. So,
All right, Chris. Well, I appreciate you joining us and swimming in the dark waters. And hopefully, when I have you back, we'll have a better internet connection so we can have better communication. I don't know what's going on with the internet right now.
yeah, that's
But I think
all
we
right.
did
As
good
long
to
as
say
it
we got janky internet. I think we did a good job.
connects to your audience, and that's fine because we're getting through it here.
All right,
Yeah.
brother. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for
All right.
coming
Thank you.
on. And I'll have you on again soon.
Perfect. That'd be awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Dark Waters.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
All right. Thank you, brother.
All right. Bye bye.